Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into regional headlines. We're leading policymakers and business figures. I am Katie Jensen. On this episode, we speak to Dr. Benedikt Franke, the Vice Chairman and CEO of the Munich Security Conference, fresh from its first ever leaders meeting in Saudi Arabia. How did regional leaders respond to President Trump's latest Gaza peace plan? And is a two-state solution remotely possible under Israel's hard-right government? What role can Saudi Arabia play in pushing diplomacy forward? And can the MSC still build consensus, or is the West too divided to shape the future? Dr. Franke, thank you for joining us on Frankly Speaking. Now, you've just concluded the Munich leaders meeting in Al Ula, Saudi Arabia. It's the first time this meeting has ever taken place in the kingdom, and just a day and a half after President Trump unveiled his Gaza peace plan. What was the mood in the room at the meeting? Frankly speaking, did participants embrace, reject or fear the plan?
First of all, thanks for having me, Katie. I think the thing I was most surprised by was the optimism in the room. I think people are fed up with the status quo. They believe that any plan is better than having no plan, and that this plan is the best that we've seen for a while. Everyone knows that it's not perfect. Everyone knows the devil is in the detail. But I do believe that a lot of people are grateful to President Trump for stopping to admire the problem and putting some pressure on both sides.
Well, I don't know if admire is the right word there. We consider the Gaza war has dragged on for more than 2 years. It was a central theme of the Munich Security Conference. Now, President Trump's latest plan puts international actors in charge of Gaza, sidelining Hamas and handing oversight to outsiders. So, Dr. Franke, from your vantage point at MSC, what are your thoughts on the plan? We've seen reports from BBC suggesting there are disputes that are yet to be resolved between Hamas military leaders in Gaza and the Hamas political leadership that do agree on it.
Yes, so I think there are disputes on all sides. We've seen the same within the Israeli government, where one side wasn't quite as happy with the plan as the other. But I guess that's just the nature of such a complex attempt to resolve such a complex conflict. Listen, if you ask me for my personal opinion or that of the Munich Security Conference, I think we would have preferred for the UN system to be used for this. The plan reinvents a lot of things that we've already invented many, many decades ago with the Blue Helmets, the Department for Peacekeeping Operations, and we've seen many conflicts being resolved through a political system led by the UN. So I think that would have been perfect, but I do understand that both sides didn't want that, and so I think we are now stuck with the second best option.
I think we would have all preferred the UN to take a stronger line. We were speaking with the Secretary General's spokesperson last week about whether the UN really still has any power, considering the repeated vetoes we've seen from the US. But let's focus particularly on your meeting. Now, the latest meeting took place in Saudi Arabia, a country, as we know, pushing hard for the ceasefire and a two-state solution. How do you view the prospects of the two-state solution, given this huge diplomatic drive we've seen set alongside the very right-wing government in Israel, as well as Hamas and the veto power of the US at the UN?
Katie, we seem to forget that a couple of years ago, we were actually pretty close to a two-state solution. So we are back to the status quo ante in many ways. And this shouldn't surprise anyone, not even in Israel's most right-wing circles. I do believe that it isn't a reward for the Palestinians to get closer to statehood. It's their right, and I think that has been discussed over and over again. I do believe, however, that this is nothing that will come anytime soon. This will be a complicated process. This will be a process in which the Palestinians need to show true leadership and in which the Israelis need to show true leadership. And I'm grateful to the Saudi government, the French government, and all these other governments that are getting and keeping involved in this conflict. They could turn elsewhere. They could let this hot potato drop, and they are not. So that actually made me come back from Saudi pretty optimistic.
Well, I think there is many who would argue that is a hot potato that has been dropped. Of course, President Trump's latest plan for peace in Gaza does not address Palestinian statehood. A big concern, certainly from this part of the world. And frankly, since October the 7th, the entire region here has been upended. Many allies in the region now openly doubt whether the US can still be trusted as a defence partner, much as you have questioned in Europe. Now, after Israel's recent attack on Doha, President Trump signed an executive order declaring that in the future any strike on Qatar would be treated as an attack on America. Tell me, is that enough to restore US credibility?
I think it is an important step. It certainly helps to restore credibility within Qatar. And I do believe it's part of a broader deal to persuade Hamas, both the political offers and the fighters on the ground, to now finally accept that they need to return the hostages, that they need to engage in a mediated solution, and that they can no longer do what they're doing on the back of the normal Palestinian population.
But correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't a treaty between two countries. It's an executive order from President Trump, which the next president could revoke with the stroke of a pen. Isn't that the case?
Yes, it definitely is the case. But let's not forget that, Qatar houses one of the biggest military bases there is in the region. That in and of itself should be quite a security guarantee. I think everyone was surprised that it wasn't. And the fact that Trump got Prime Minister Netanyahu to apologize to the Qataris, and actually not behind closed doors, but for everyone to see, I think that was a hugely important move. And not an easy one to pull off. Not an easy one to pull off.
Yeah, I think it should have been enough having the US military base there. It clearly wasn't in the past. But moving forward, we saw the recent gathering in Alula of MSC. That was a smaller, more regional meeting, but your annual flagship conference took place in Munich this February and laid bare some serious transatlantic rifts, particularly between the US and Europe. How can the MSC realistically foster cohesion, and do you expect things to get worse before they get better?
We at the Munich Security Conference, we really don't want to be a doom and gloom organization. We want to focus on the silver linings. And there are many silver linings out there, Katie. But yes, you're absolutely right. This year's Munich Security Conference obviously was dominated by the speech by the US Vice President, who put some pressure on his European friends, allies, and partners, and in a way hurt us where it hurt most, with our values. I do believe that everyone has the right to come to Munich and make his or her case. He did so. The Europeans, I think, gave a pretty impressive answer, not in words, but by massively increasing their defense budgets, by massively investing in resilience, and by making some of the structural changes that we've pushed ahead of us for so many years and decades. So stuff is moving in Europe, and it is due to that speech too. And I do hope that we can play a similarly catalytic role when it comes to diplomatic efforts in the Middle East.
I mean, Vice President J.D. Vance surely did not pull any punches when it came to that speech, made headlines around the world. There are other critics, though, not just Mr. Vance. Critics who say the Munich Security Conference has put Ukraine front and centre, while conflicts like Gaza, now just entering its third year, are treated as secondary. There is that perception, in fact, that you've always been very much Eurocentric. Do you think that's fair? Would you agree with that?
I don't think it's fair, and I wouldn't agree with it, but I understand that there are some who think that way. I think a quick look at our website, a quick look at the list of events that we've done over the past 24 months will clearly show that we've been to places like Rio de Janeiro, Joburg, Nairobi, Al-Ula. We've been to Ukraine once. So I don't think that's fair. But you're absolutely right. The Munich Security Conference was founded 60 odd years ago as a transatlantic gathering. We are transatlantic in heart still, but we're global by necessity. And it also depends on whether regional organizations and national governments actually want to use us. I do have a feeling that governments from your region, from the Middle East, are now more prepared to engage in the kind of diplomatic activities that we foster. And so I think down the road, you will see a much stronger focus on conflicts like Gaza, Sudan, let's not forget Sudan, Yemen. We had good sessions on the Red Sea in Yemen over the last 2 days. You'll see a stronger focus on those.
Okay, so can we expect more regional events in this part of the world then? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I'm also saying more regional themes and participants at the main conference.
Okay, and I think having these events is one thing, but we saw at the UN just a couple of weeks ago in his speech, President Trump accused Europe, particularly Germany, of virtue signalling on Ukraine while still buying Russian gas. Tell me, do those charges resonate in Germany today? And from your viewpoint at MSC, do you agree with him? Should Europe, and Germany in particular, should they have cut all economic ties with Russia?
This is a two-edged sword. First of all,
Yeah.
President Trump is right on that point. He is certainly right that we have had a tendency, and sometimes still do have a tendency, to be, traveling across the world with a moral sort of plan that we need to persuade people to follow our values and that everyone else's values are a little more problematic. I do believe that the double standards that he calls out are there. They're plain for all to see. And you do begin to see people addressing them head on. And it's not just us buying Russian gas via India. It's also us treating the ICC verdict against Netanyahu differently from the one against Putin. It is us not keeping our climate financing promises. It is us treating the sovereignty of Mauritius differently from the sovereignty of Ukraine. And we need to address that. If we want to build broader and more sustainable alliances across the world, Germany, the European Union, and the liberal West in general need to get started on that very soon. Otherwise, it's going to be too late.
Okay, and do you feel that's been a mistake so far of Europe?
Yes, no, definitely, without a question.
And again, obviously, there are plans to pull back on Russian oil and gas. I know 2028, LNG, potentially looking at the start of 2027. But we are years into the war with Ukraine, and there's certainly been a very different attitude towards the invaders of Russia versus Israel. But let's talk a little bit more broadly, because I think that is a traditional security picture when it comes to wars and alliances. But as we know, security today is also cyber attacks, AI, these big disinformation campaigns. And we're talking about tools that really can destabilize a society without even firing a shot. So, Dr. Franke, is the current global security system really built to handle those threats today?
It is certainly not. Let me, start at the meta level. The United Nations system, our entire global governance architecture, was built in the late 40s of the last century to solve the problems of the late 20s of the last century. This system is no longer fit for purpose, and we need to reform it, and we need to ensure that the global south has a stronger say in that. So that's the meta level. And then when you go down to the national and even the subnational level, the West is no longer resilient, if we ever were. We get caught off balance almost daily by authoritarian governments, authoritarian actors, criminal actors from across the world. And I do believe that we need to get out of this downward spiral of us failing to address these structural deficiencies and not addressing our vulnerabilities and dependency. You did mention Russia, and you did mention that Germany is still, buying Russian oil. I am not advocating, and we are not advocating for a weak, a crumbling, a totally destroyed Russia. That's not what it is. What we want is the war in Ukraine to end, and a security order in Europe being built that includes Russia and incentivizes them to have a stake in a constructive global governance system. And at the moment, we are far, far from that.
Yeah, we're still very much on that political stalemate. Just picking up on what you were talking about, really the needs in order to be more proactive rather than reactive. Some of the work you've been doing, particularly when it comes to cyber and AI threats, there's been a big debate about that and the responsibilities of big tech. I know at Munich last year in February, I think, big tech companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI and TikTok, at your event, they all promised to label AI-generated content, big agreement, non-binding, but I feel like the real danger doesn't necessarily come from them. Often it comes from these non-state actors and the hostile governments who don't play by the rules. How do you think that threat can actually be contained?
Okay, I think in two ways. I do believe that we need to ensure that tech companies are regulated in a way that in fact incentivizes them to enable the enormous positive effects of the technology they offer. We always focus on the doom and gloom, on the negative effects of social media on democracy, but there could be great positive effects too. And that needs to be ascertained through clear regulation. I know we have too much regulation in Europe, but there is sensible regulation out there that I think we could use. Second, we must end the age of impunity. We must make sure that state and non-state actors who target democratic processes, who target societal cohesion, that they will be taken to court, that they will pay, that they will no longer be able to use the other parts of the global governance system that they are not attacking. There are things that we can do, Katie, and we're not doing enough of those.
Okay, so what do we need to do more then? Because I think it very much speaks to a wider problem where the threats are evolving faster than the institutions. Doctor, what would you see as the single biggest blind spot in Western security thinking today?
I think it's very clearly the lack of resilience. Our societies, our economies, our way of living is not resilient. We have, over the last decade, built up cluster risks around the world. Europe is dependent on American technology, on Russian energy, on Chinese market access and Chinese raw materials and Chinese resources. We are dependent on the goodwill of all the other states in the UN General Assembly. That's not a sustainable situation. And hence, building up resilience, which is not the same as, Europe first or Europe alone. That's not what it is. It is making sure that our societies are less dependent on the actions of others around the world.
But then how do we put that into place? Like, how do we enforce that? How do we deter? What does that mean on a very practical level?
I think on a very practical level, let me just pick out three things. We need to identify these dependencies, and we haven't done that. We need to address them one by one. How dependent are we on copper from X? How dependent are we on lithium from Y? And we need to find alternative supply chains. Number one. For that, we need to build broader alliances. We need to build alliances with African countries that we have, not even looked at over the last 20 or 30 years. We need to take them seriously. We need to make sure that they have a stake in global governance and that they want to work with us to reduce cluster. And there are things that we can do at home. Stronger capital union, stronger fiscal union, a stronger domestic market within Europe, circularity, a focus on recycling. There are so many very concrete things that we can do to be just a little less dependent on those that weaponize these dependencies against.
Sure, and I think diversification has to be key, particularly when we see, administrations like Washington introducing these tariffs and making global trade a lot more challenging. One more point, though, about blind spots. I think representation and equal opportunities is another important one to address. Tell me, how does the MSC ensure diverse representation, particularly from regions who are most affected by conflict, but often underrepresented in global forums?
So we actually have an entire unit here within the MSC that tries to ensure diversification. We have done incredibly well, but we're nowhere near where we want to be. Different from many, if not most other fora, more than half of our speakers and moderators are female. Almost a third of our speakers and moderators came from the Global South. Most of our events over the past decade have taken place in the Global South. Most of the side event applications for events around the Munich Security Conference by now come from the Global South. We've done a lot, but does it mean we are where we want to be, where we need to be? No, we want more people from Northern Africa, but many of those are sanctioned. Many of those don't want to travel or cannot afford to travel. So we're trying to find ways, together with the German government, together with the European Union, together with the African Union, to get these people to Munich. The same is true for Russians. The same is true for other actors around the world that we want to invite proactively and have them in Munich if we have the feeling that they are ready to have a constructive discussion.
I mean, having more women, having more speakers and moderators from the Global South, that's certainly all a positive as long as we're still looking at quality. It's not about quotas and just ticking a box, I think. Tell me, what about specifically within your own organisation, MSC? You discuss the Middle East constantly. I'd be interested to understand how many Arabs or employees of Arab origin actually work there with you.
You know, when I started, we used to be a completely white male German outfit. We no longer are, and we're actually, sometimes it feels like a very diverse startup. Yes, we do have several employees from the Arab world. We have this Middle East consultation group where the lead is a wonderful lady from Egypt. We have people who hold several passports, and hence it's difficult to, some of them identify as Global South, but really are German and vice versa. Again, is this enough? No, but I do believe that the fact that for the first time we will have a non-German chair with Jens Stoltenberg joining us whenever his job in Norway comes to an end, that will mean that our language of operation will turn to English. That will make it much easier for us to hire people from across the world and add to, I would say, a good dozen from places like Ecuador. We have a colleague here. We have somebody from Somalia. It's not good, but it's better than it was, and it will get a lot better down the road.
And how many people work for you globally?
Full-time, a little more than 100, but then we have well over 100, 150, 200 that come in for 6 months to prepare the main conference, that support specific but time-limited projects like our Middle East consultation group. So I guess in total it sort of varies between 200 and 300.
Okay, so several Arab employees out of several hundred people internationally. I feel like there certainly is still some way to go. Dr. Frank, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, appreciate your insights, and we look forward to seeing more of the MSC in the MENA region, that is for sure. When can you specify any particular events or locations that are going to be happening over here in the next 12 to 24 months?
Of course. We'll be back at the Doha Forum in, I think, less than 6 weeks. So yes, heard your message loud and clear, and you'll see us over there.
We look forward to it. Dr. Frank, thank you for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.